the swag on. Get the swag on.
Bonsoir tout le monde, donc Remy Bourganel, diplômé de l'ENSAD en design industriel en 97, avec un projet qui faisait déjà des interactions par le geste pour que les enfants puissent jouer de la musique à partir de leur propre corps avec Atao Tanaka et puis l'IRCAM, 6 ans avant Minority Report. J'ai travaillé chez Mitsubishi Electric un peu au début des années 2000, j'ai monté un bureau de design avancé, puis Samsung à Londres, et puis chez Nokia où j'ai monté quelques unités, et où j'ai travaillé avec NACO, puis je suis revenu en France chez Orange Valley pour diriger le design d'Orange Valley, et puis monter un laboratoire à l'ENSAD. Il y a plusieurs laboratoires en fait, moi j'en m'occupe que d'un seul, qui travaille sur le social media, donc le lien entre les utilisateurs et comment le numérique peut créer du lien. En fait, je peux faire la présentation en français ou en anglais, comme Nako parle plutôt en anglais. Je pensais que c'était sympa de la faire en anglais pour qu'ils comprennent, mais à moins si vous préférez, alors je fais en français. Qui préfère en français? Il n'y en a que deux, bon, bah alors vous avez perdu. Donc en fait, on va faire des présentations assez complémentaires. L'enjeu, c'est effectivement de montrer comment le design peut être partie prenante dans le montage d'un projet, et pas juste une fonction pour exécuter un projet. Et il ne s'agit pas de faire la leçon non plus, hein. On va dialoguer, mais on va donner quelques principes et quelques exemples. Peut-être pour commencer, la citation de Charles Mingus qui dit que finalement, faire des choses extrêmement simples, c'est de la créativité. Alors en design, on parle de synthèse créative. Je vais développer un peu ce point. Pour commencer, les basiques, en fait, en design, on s'appuie sur peu de choses finalement. Il y en a un qui est la Gestalt, théorie de la forme. On dit qu'on ne pense jamais un problème comme divisable en sous-petites parties. En fait, on pense toujours l'ensemble. Et l'ensemble plus grand que les éléments qu'il constitue, c'est la Gestalt, théorie de la forme. Ça veut dire que quand vous voyez ces formes-là, parfois en haut à droite, vous voyez un vase. C'est un vase ou c'est un visage. En fait, la question de la forme et la contreforme, le plein, le vide, cet ensemble, c'est un ensemble qu'on ne peut pas diviser. Et le designer, il pense l'ensemble, toujours avant le détail. Et on peut créer des illusions. Vous connaissez le cas de la vieille dame ici et de la jeune dame. Vous connaissez certainement quelques-uns de ces exemples. Ou l'illusion d'un triangle qui n'existe pas au milieu des trois cercles, par exemple. Bon, ça, quand on l'applique dans une logique de... Sorry, I should do it in English. I promised it in English. When you apply that in a project, it could be very concrete. If you look at these two TVs, you show these two TVs, one with a high definition image with average sound, one with average image with high definition sound, and you ask the user which one looks like having the best image, and then the user will say the one which actually has the best sound. That's a very good concrete example of Gestalt. So it's not like an engineering perspective where you can rationally combine features to make the best product. The assembling of it makes something bigger than the sum of the parts. So in fact, the sound has an impact on the perception of the vision. So with a high quality sound, you have a better perception of the image quality actually. So designers think like that. They think the whole, you can only judge the whole. So that means that designers are doing abduction. So Umberto Eco, the writer who wrote The Name of the Rose, says abduction is like Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes comes in a room, he has no knowledge, he thinks there's one killer. The killer is you. A hypothesis. To prove it's you, I will build an hypothesis. That's the prototype, the interim object. So, and I will build that prototype. To make that assumption, I will evaluate all the puzzle that makes sense. In fact, I will realize it's not you, but in the process of searching for justifying if it's you, I build knowledge, and then I destroy the prototype, and that helps me to go to the second assumption that the killer might be you, so on and so on. So for Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, or Colombo, it's the same story. After 3 or 4 steps, he finds the killer. The designer thinks the same way. Without any knowledge in any discipline, eventually, by iterating and prototyping, it can build knowledge. It doesn't build a prototype to prove something right, but to explore and learn. That's a very different meaning. Just when we talk about prototyping, an engineer thinks that prototyping is to demonstrate that it works. A designer might use the prototype to explore whether it's relevant and might just go to a completely different route. So sometimes it might be frustrating for an engineer, but that's called abductive thinking, as projecting an hypothesis to learn. And so that includes quick and dirty prototyping. So here another example of Gestalt. That's a marketing or engineering view of what a product definition, and that's a designer's view. So if you put the Muji CD player within that feature list, it would look extremely poor. It just does one simple thing, it plays CD. Yes, but the experience of it is quite special. It puts the CD on the wall, you play it by pulling the string, it's very beautiful, it rotates, you see the things, and the experience matters. But when you compare it to a feature list, then it's nonsense, it looks like a loser. But when you see it as a whole, as an experience, then it makes sense. So again, if you see it as an experience, it's different. So when we start building experience as a designer, we take many perspectives. One is a top-down, so as a top-down you bring value systems, whether it's the local culture, whether it's a religion, whether it's the values of a community, and sometimes it gets encapsulated in a brand, and the bottom-up, so the user needs, and then you have to make the synthesis of these two polarities, so a value system and the user needs. So here are two examples. So on the left, it's the Freemason symbols, so the square and the compass. So that's a value system. And on the right-hand side, that's real life of people in India, and their needs would be very down to earth. So you have to combine these two extremes. Another thing we do in design is we think that we want people to learn things easily, so we capitalize on some others' theories. So Piaget is one. So Piaget is one guy who explained how children learn. And he says basically a children learn something from what he knows from before. So he can only know from experience B. He puts that in comparison to what he experienced before in experience A. So basically his background helps him to learn, and he compares. By doing so, we talk about affordances. So someone comes with his knowledge. That knowledge creates archetype, and that archetype's helping to address something completely new. So if you see a completely new handle on a door, your brain will still see that as a handle, then you can pull the handle, although it's a handle you've never seen. So your brain created archetypes of handles. And as designers, we do that because we think that the user has to adapt to something new from what he knew before. So that the designer is in that tension between the marketing people pushing for innovation and helping the user to build from their knowledge. So a very simple example is the desktop metaphor. Do you know the desktop metaphor built by Xerox PARC? In the 70s in the Silicon Valley, a few guys invented a way for people to use computers without any training. Before that, you had long trainings to adapt to the machine, and the brief was how could a secretary be able to use the machine without any training. So what they used metaphors of something like in real life, a desktop with folders and bins and files and everything that could look like every day, almost similar enough so that people could think, I know that, I know how it works, then I can learn. So as a designer, we're helping something completely new to be usable by the person through metaphors. So we create affordance. The bin is like a bin, not exactly like, but the metaphor helps the person to engage in learning the thing. But if you play that the other way around, that's quite funny. So if you Google BBC iPod Walkman case, it's a very funny situation where a kid is given a Walkman. He's from the iPod generation. And here he's given the Walkman. So what does he do? He projects the iPod experience on the Walkman. Common sense for Piaget theory. But of course it doesn't work. So he's searching for the shuffle mode. He's searching for the etc., etc. And of course, he doesn't find that, so he's inventing the shuffle mode through accelerate, play, and he doesn't understand the metal function. He thinks it's an audio system. It's actually for the tape quality. He doesn't get that. He's struggling to understand, of course, that the tape can be changed with two sides. Why having two sides? Something is completely nonsense. So if you play that backward, then it's a very good example of how people project their knowledge from where they are to something new, and in that case, it's super funny. Then some people made some series of where design makes sense when you work. So Roberto Vergnanti is one, and Donald Norman is another one. They basically say here, when there's a incremental technical change and incremental change in the meaning, it's just market pull. Design is good, but it's not very the best use of design. When there is a radical change in meaning and no technical change, it's here design can start. When it's technological change but no meaning change, it's techno push. And then when there's a technology change and meaning change, it's a technology epiphany, or where design works here as well. So a very simple example is on the bottom right, it's like the Renault monospace. So technologically there was nothing new, but they rearranged the car so that it makes a new meaning. It's the fact you change the position of the seats, everything is rearranged. No radical technology change, but it's just a new kind of product still. On the top right, it would be more the Nintendo Wii. So there is a combination of technology change. So there's accelerometer plus gyroscope, and they address new kind of players. It's not for the geeks, male, with games based on competition and performance. It's more for social game where people work together between generation, between genders, and women could play the game. So that combination. So in these two cases, design makes sense and it can help frame the new product. So in fact, when we talk about the abductive thinking and the Gestalt, design can be reduced to something very simple. It's about defining the qualities of the experience you deliver. So then here as well, there are quite a few models. One from Donald Norman, which is actually originally from Leroy-Gourhan, French model. He says the experience is visceral, reflective, and behavioral. That's quite not simple to understand. If we put it in designer's language, we would say it's sensorial, symbolic, and functional. And if you put qualities on these three, then here you define the essence of your brand and your product. And I'll show you how later. So if you want to integrate design as a strategic thing to build your startup, then rather than think of your product, you should think of the quality of the product you want to deliver first. And I'll give you examples how. So when we talk about qualities and principles, there are tons of things. It goes from universal principles to brand and product. So from the universal principles, just for general culture, one is famous. Dieter Rams, who designed for Braun, he invented these 10 design principles of good design in the 68, I think. They're still relevant. Now, if you look at the UK government, the guidelines they give for designers to develop things for the government, they have themselves governed key principles. So they say, okay, digital by default, putting user first, learn from the journey, building a network, putting barriers aside, creating environment for technology, leaders to flourish, and don't do everything yourself because you can't. BBC have principles also for everything they do, so they think their design has to be universal, compelling, authentic, pioneering, current, distinctive, joined up, local, global, modern, British, and best. And they document what they mean exactly in that, so you can search online if you want the detail of it. Facebook have their own. Also, I don't think that the Facebook principle are that great. If I look at the last one, transparent, I don't think that any of the Facebook algorithms are actually transparent. I have no idea the logic in the filtering of what comes on my wall versus what doesn't. There are a few explanations, and journalists are trying to find out exactly the logic, but it's not transparent. They don't design for transparency at all, I think. Google have their own. Okay, so we can search for these. They're interesting. Microsoft, they have their own also. So they've published for their OS platform, the mobile OS. So they've done some for the developers. So the good principles for developers and some for the look and feel. It's quite detailed. Again, you can find them online, but this is a good practice to show before to design what's the philosophy behind. So now, in practice, Nako and I worked on a project in Nokia where we were asked to design the music strategy for Nokia. And we were to inspire designers to develop the details. So we designed principles in the first place. And these principles were made of the Nokia DNA, the user need, the must fix, so everything we observe doesn't work throughout the existing product, and the opportunities, and that we're making the principles. And we ended up making 9 principles out of 3 groups, so simplify, express, amplify, and then progressively we were translating the synthesis of these 4 dimensions together. And it was quite successful because out of this, then any designer could design a very good experience based on that. And we were not designing necessarily it all in the detail ourselves. We gave examples of it, but then anyone could do that after you, and this principle would last long, whatever the product you develop. The point I'm trying to make is that these experience qualities or design principles actually are essential. They are the DNA of your product and your brand. They're not the assets. Sometimes people ask, so the DNA is like the brand guidelines, you have to do this, you have to do this font, this, and that. No, the assets are instantiation of the DNA, but the DNA is a vision. The assets are an instantiation for a certain time. So Facebook had a vision for a long-term thing, and they did all they had to in the short term to execute that, but the first Facebook version 1, 2, 3, etc. were only interim steps towards the vision. The principles forming the vision shouldn't have changed, but the way to achieve that, they had to do different products along and eventually kill their own assets. If one day they have to kill their wall, they might have to. But if the wall is an asset, the wall is not Facebook. If they have a good DNA, the wall might be killed if they need to achieve the vision based on this principle. If making my point clear, it's true here for here it's Flipboard. So they have different assets depending on iPad, iPhone platforms. So the interaction is slightly different, and eventually, if their principles are good enough, the asset which is about flipping a page should just be an asset. If they need to grow and go beyond that first asset, that they should be able to do that. That's the point. So in case of Orange Valley, for instance, I worked on the project Libon, and the ambition was to reinvent communication and presence. And we had 4 qualities that we've detailed in many sub-options, but to make it simple here, I show only these 4 qualities. So it was about being gracious in the sense of the emotional quality in the experience of a relationship with someone, elegant in the sensorial perspective, real in the cognitive experience, so real as we have to apply politeness. You can't, maybe we might explore new ways of making a phone call, like you knock a door before you enter a room. So what does that mean? So applying the principle of real into communication was a very interesting thing, because we can create many instances, explore many instances of that, as long as we were true to these principles and alive, so the practical qualities of making feel like there's always something going on. So with that, we had once to interpret the question of presence. So we first explored the idea of my screen is like the space between you and I. So we thought of that surface as an elastic surface. So if I push, it goes through your side. So we started programming algorithms of non-Newtonian material non-Newtonian. It's like maizena. So, you know maïzena, if you fill a swimming pool with maïzena, if you run, you don't fall. If you walk, you fall. Because the force of the impact means that either you go through or you bounce. So we started playing with this, and then we realized it wasn't really working. So we went a completely different route. We then thought, okay, we're going to, rather than having that face as it between you and I, we're going to explore the case where the surface is the same. We're far away from each other, and we look at the same, and then we're drawing on it real time, and we draw in the sand. So it vanishes if you don't do anything, and we had that feeling of being together, and then by drawing in the sand, real time 3D modeling, we had the feeling of being in face of the very same screen. So because we were just trying to illustrate the principles, not sticking on one idea, then it was very an easy way to have more options to translate that, and eventually in 5 years from now, reinterpret the principles as well. And that solution being an asset for 3 years, but we could get rid of it if in 3 years the social rules would be different online, and then we have to reinterpret. So that's the point. The DNA and the instantiation of it are two different things, and people are very often mixing things and get attached to the asset. Oh, that's an asset, that's an heritage, we have to keep it. I claim that if you've designed your DNA well, then you don't need to get attached to the asset. Few more points. When we design DNA and when we build vision, pay attention to not build the ideal world like in some corporate videos where the world is all white and pure and you only touch glass surfaces and nothing gets wrong. Things get wrong. They always get wrong, so you have to design for errors. People make mistakes, and part of your principles might be to include how you can best do in the case of errors. Here, this is just a reference to the @1 technique. If you want to buy the book that's called This is Service Design Thinking, it says if you really apply the design throughout the process, then this is one way of doing it. You have to understand the perspective of all the actors of the project, the touch points, digital or tangible, the offering, the user needs, and the experience qualities. So, and they illustrate the principles quite well, actually, so I recommend the book. So now when you apply that in a startup, I guess the point I've tried to make here is that design is not just a function to execute a vision you've built ahead. The design is a tool to build your vision in the first place. And to do so, you can think of design to frame your vision before to execute the vision by defining the qualities that you want your product that you build as a brand to last for in the longer term. So it's about building the vision and understanding the instantiations you might want to do in your roadmap. And so the design is an integral part of the thinking. And a thing that is very specific when you design the principles is that things are not, we call synchronic or diachronic. Synchronic is like, I see this, and it's self-contained, I can see what it does, but with Internet of Things or service platform like Facebook, it doesn't reveal just instantly. It reveals as you use it, and it transforms over time. So Facebook have always been transforming. So we call it a diachronic experience. So it's even more important to stick to principles over time because your product will constantly transform. That's the specific aspect of digital services. They keep transforming. It's like a momentum, a shape that keeps evolving, but it shouldn't evolve away from your principles. It should be better instantiations of your principles. And you have to understand that you also have to get the designer to discover what that product is on the longer run. So 2 examples, the Muji CD player, it just does one thing, you pull the string, it plays. But that new product, Iterative music player, which is done from former colleagues of us as well, from Nokia, it's a product that learns. It learns the music you play in that room, then in that room, and that room at certain time of the day, so it learns from context. And the more it learns, the better it delivers the music relevant to the context, which is time and place. Which brings me to the time, place, or context thing. In design, keep always in mind the question of context. In digital products and services, we tend to think that real-time experience is the thing. When we talk about location services, for instance, we say, oh, Nako is in Gare du Nord, he's coming from London, I am in Gare du Nord, the system knows we know each other, it says you should meet. Well, no, sorry, I'm on my way to another meeting, and so he is, and then we cannot meet. So we are like dreaming that real-time is the thing. It's actually not. In reality, nothing happens just in the moment. So I sometimes use this Minkowski's model, which is that looks smart, but it's actually from quantum physics. That model actually is very interesting. It says, in the present, the potential is infinite, but the value is zero. While the more you go in the future and in the past, the more the potential experience is. So it's like for location services. You say, if I knew ahead that Nako would be at Gare du Nord an hour ahead, I could say I'm changing my plan and I say I'm going to meet you there. Or if the system told me like Nako was there an hour ago, I could say, too bad, if only I knew, next time let's try to catch up. So it's true in many services where the value is rarely just in the moment. It's sometimes much more about what's going to happen just next or what happened before. And we tend to forget that. So in design, we talk about context. And the classics are people who are around you. Does that make any difference in the service? The time, before, during, after, as I said. And where are you? So that's an easy thing to improve your service. And another thing is people think sometimes when they've designed their DNA, they can stretch it. It's very difficult to stretch a DNA or transform it away from what it's been. So if you take Toyota understands that it does mass market product, and if it wants to do premium cars, it does Lexus. And if your product or brand is perceived by the user somewhere, but you want to go somewhere else, you could, but you need the steps to transform there, and you cannot stretch things. So I'm super disappointed by the advertising of Airbnb in Paris Tube, for instance, because the advertising they show is completely opposite to their DNA. They show pictures of a living room where there's nobody, and it looks like a classic ad for hotel made by a travel agent. First time I looked at it, I thought it was like a travel agent ad. And I thought, that's nonsense. Nothing about Airbnb where there's a direct contact with the person before to book, and you go in places which are within very specific areas where usually there was no hotel. If I go in London through Airbnb, I would go in Shoreditch, but there's no hotel in Shoreditch, or very few, but hotels would be in tourist places, not in Shoreditch. And there's the relationship with the person, and the experience is all about something quite personal. And the Airbnb ads in Paris at the moment are completely opposite to their DNA. So probably they're going through that to scale up, but they're scaling up against their DNA. So at the end, their core audience might not go for Airbnb anymore. That's an interesting time for them. Because you can't stretch your DNA. So people who promoted Airbnb might not promote Airbnb anymore because they're challenging their values. So I've done an experiment quickly applying the experience qualities of Airbnb on the model. So on the sensorial side, it would be about a fluid experience on screen. Things are very visual, it's super simplified, it's very casual. On the symbolic aspect, it's about a one-to-one relationship. It's about the community of value, the trust, the casual deep dive, in the sense that I want to live in the city like if I was in the city. So I can go in London and live like if I was there, not being parked in a tourist area in a way. So I can really live like if I was there. And then on the functional side, of course, there's a long list of one-to-one chat before booking, in the heart of a location, personal search, explore through photos and map, etc. That's it.